Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hey there.
This is where we jump into your sources, your notes, articles, whatever you've got, and we pull out the most interesting insights. Basically a shortcut to getting well informed. So today we're diving into excerpts from a YouTube video transcript. It features an IELTS speaking test, and then crucially, the feedback given to the test taker by an expert.
Right. So we get both sides, the actual performance and the analysis.
Exactly. Our mission here is to unpack what the test taker talked about, sure, but maybe even more importantly, to understand that examiner feedback. You know, how performance and structure matter, not just
knowing the language.
Precisely. It's about how you use it in that specific test context. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So we start by getting a glimpse into this test taker's world. They cover quite a range of topics, often giving really personal answers.
Yeah, you get a real sense of them.
Kicking things off, they talked about the weather. Apparently the weather then was surprisingly good for winter. Felt more like summer, they said.
Yeah, but cool enough for a light jacket. Perfect, apparently, for heading to the beach, which they seem to like.
Ah, okay. So their ideal weather is definitely summer then.
Yeah.
Beach, outdoors stuff.
Totally. Getting out with family, exploring. But they also had a strong dislike for very cold weather, mentioned minus 20 Celsius.
Wow. Yeah, that's properly cold.
Right. And the reason was it stops them getting outside, makes them feel kind of trapped, you know?
I get that. Okay, so from weather, they moved on to photography, called it a real passion.
And they'd actually done a university course in it. Got a really high score, too, like 19 out of 20.
That's impressive. So not just a casual hobby. They mentioned owning equipment.
Yep, camera, lenses, the works. But what I found interesting was their take on what makes a great photographer.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
It wasn't just about having fancy gear. They stressed needing a good eye and the ability to capture the moment. That was key for them.
Right. And they specifically contrasted that with, like, posed photos, didn't they?
Exactly. Their method was more about just follow the person, capturing them naturally, spontaneously, rather than waiting for a pose.
I like that. More authentic. Okay, next topic. Animals. And here they showed, well, a lot of affection for dogs.
Oh, yeah. Said they love them so much. Used to treat their dogs like a baby. Even mentioned haircuts and doctor visits.
Wow, that's commitment.
It is. But there was a complication sometimes. Their mother had an allergy, so occasionally the dogs had to stay at their grandma's place.
Wow, okay. Practicalities. But they had a really strong view on zoos, right?
Definitely. Affirm not their place, just felt it was fundamentally wrong. You know, contrasting a cage with the open sky for a bird or the forest for other animals.
Yeah, you can hear that passion for natural freedom.
Absolutely. But interestingly, despite loving dogs so much, they don't actually have any pets right now.
Oh, why's that?
The reason given was the local weather again. Mentioned it being 50 degrees Celsius sometimes.
50 degrees, good luck walking a dog in that.
Exactly. It makes it pretty much impossible, or at least very difficult. So no dog for now.
Makes sense. Okay, moving on. Colors. They mentioned their country's flag, red, white, and green.
But they pointed out there isn't really one specific country color as such.
Gotcha. And personally, their favorite color was black.
Yeah, but they also added that recently they've started liking bright and light colors more, and they sort of hinted it might be linked to losing weight.
Oh, interesting connection. Like a personal shift reflected in color preference.
Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? They also talked about how colors affect mood, like how a dark room feels dark, obviously. But white walls in a bright house feel positive, almost reflective.
Yeah, that idea of the environment reflecting back at you.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff. Okay, finally, they talked quite a bit about houses and living, specifically their grandma's house.
Right, the one in the mountains near Beirut in Lebanon.
And they described it?
Yeah.
How would they put it? Like looking like a castle?
Yeah, because of the old structure, the old walls. You could really sense the emotional connection there. Said they feel like home when they're there.
You can almost picture it. Mention memories, the smell of the garden.
Definitely a special place for them. Clear emotional anchor.
Sounds amazing. They also share preferences for their ideal living situation, leaning towards a villa or maybe a duplex rather than just an apartment.
Especially with babies, they mentioned. For separation, a bit more space.
Practical thinking. And the classic debate, buying versus renting.
Firmly pro-buying. The feeling was that renting is like losing my money, just throwing it away each month.
A common feeling. Though they did add a caveat.
Yeah, smartly said that if prices are sky high, maybe wait. So practicality mixed in there too.
Good point. And they also touched on when people typically move out of their parents' home, said in Beirut, It's not like a fixed age, like 18 elsewhere.
Right, often linked more to marriage. And they actually seem to quite enjoy living with their parents, suggesting less of that cultural pressure to leave early.
Okay, so we've built up this pretty detailed picture of the test taker, right? Their life, their views, passions, weather, photos, dogs, houses.
Definitely. And their English seems pretty good, lots to say.
Exactly. They're articulate, they have opinions.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets, well, I think really instructive. The examiner's feedback.
Ah, yes. The pivot point. This is where we shift from what they said to how they said it, specifically for the test.
Right. And the examiner did start with positives. Grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, all rated as good. Fluency and coherence too, but with a qualifier.
At times. That's the key phrase, isn't it?
He really is. Yeah. Because then they pinpointed specific areas that needed improvement. One big one was searching for words.
Right, which the examiner felt broke the flow, affected the fluency score.
And the advice wasn't just learn more words. It was more strategic. If you're stuck, don't just pause awkwardly. Try to paraphrase, explain the idea in simpler terms. Keep talking.
Exactly. It's about maintaining that communicative momentum. Getting stuck on one perfect word can really hurt the overall impression, even if you eventually find it. Explaining around it shows flexibility. It's a useful skill anyway, test or no test.
Definitely. Another point, quite specific to the context, was about maybe using Arabic words sometimes.
Yeah, where appropriate, and then explaining them briefly. Given that it's a multilingual environment, that can actually sound quite natural and authentic.
As long as you make sure the examiner understands what you mean.
Right, it shows linguistic awareness. Okay, then they got into specific test parts. Part 2, the long turn, had an issue.
What was that?
The examiner felt the test taker looked down at the cue card too much, and they sort of rushed through the bullet points.
Yeah, like a checklist.
Exactly. So they got through the points quickly, but then ran out of things to say towards the end and started repeating themselves.
I can see how that would happen. So what was the advice?
Treat the examiner more like a friend you're chatting with. Tell the story naturally. Use the cue card just as a safety net, if you genuinely get lost. Don't read from it.
Right. Focus on connecting, telling the story, or explaining the topic, rather than just ticking off points. That would probably lead to better pacing and more depth, too.
Precisely. It avoids that rushed, slightly unnatural feel that just reading points can create. It impacts fluency and coherence scores in that part.
Okay, makes sense. And then part 3, this is the more abstract discussion part.
Yeah, and the feedback here was that the test taker mostly just gave their own personal point of view. Lots of, I think this, or in my opinion.
And that's not enough.
Well, it's the starting point. But for part 3, the goal is to develop the answer much more. It's not just stating your view, it's exploring the topic more broadly.
So how would you do that?
For example, you state your view, sure, but then you might explain why you think that in more detail. Or, crucially, you could acknowledge other perspectives. Maybe explain why other people might think differently, compare options, discuss implications.
Okay, so let's take that buying versus renting example they gave. Instead of just saying, I think buying is better because renting is losing money.
Right. A more developed part 3 answer might go something like, well, personally, I strongly favor buying. For me, renting feels like throwing money away when you could be building equity. However, I can definitely see the appeal of renting for some people. It offers, huge flexibility. If you need to move for a job or just fancy a change, it's much easier. There's none of the hassle of selling. So while my preference is for buying for financial security, I absolutely get that the freedom of renting is a big plus for others.
Ah, okay. So you state your view, but then you explore the alternative, showing you understand the nuances.
Exactly that. It demonstrates more analytical thinking, a better ability to structure a balanced argument, which is really what they're looking for in part 3. It's a higher level skill than just stating an opinion.
Right. So pulling this all together, what's the big takeaway here, the core message from all this feedback?
I think it's pretty powerful, actually. Having good English grammar, vocab, pronunciation, it's essential. It's the foundation, no doubt.
But it's not the whole story for something like this test.
Not at all. Success in these structured situations, whether it's IELTS or, frankly, a job interview or a presentation, it also demands you understand the specific format, you know what's expected, and you practice how you deliver your message within those constraints.
Yeah, the rules of the game almost.
Pretty much. This video example really highlights how someone can have strong language skills, but might not hit the top scores if they haven't also figured out the communication strategies needed for that particular test. It's about performance, not just knowledge.
So we've taken this deep dive, gone from hearing about someone's life, their thoughts on weather, dogs, houses, right through to the nitty-gritty of test-taking strategy and feedback. And what's really striking, I think, is how much of that expert feedback focused on how things were said. The pacing, the structure, the development of ideas, the strategic choices. Arguably more than just the content itself or whether the English was simply correct.
It's a really important reminder, isn't it? Effective communication, whatever the context, isn't just about having the right information or good language skills. It's so much about tailoring how you present it, your structure, your delivery to fit the situation and your audience.
Absolutely. And it leaves you with a question, doesn't it? Thinking about our own communication. How often do we get caught up in just what we want to say and maybe forget to consider how the way we say it, the format, the delivery is actually shaping how it lands?
Yeah. How much does the package influence the perception of the contents? Definitely something to mull over.